I read Heart the Lover over the weekend, and I'd been putting this one off for a while. Pretty much everyone whose book taste I trust had it on their 5-star best of 2025 list. And to be honest, there are very, very few book reviewers nowadays that I would go to bat for because I feel there is a cultural shift in which people are unwilling to map their tastes under the guise of everything needs to be a positive review, which I do think that we should be kind of generous in our reviews, but I don't think that being precise about subjective qualities that landed for you or didn't is in any way doing a disservice to the book. And furthermore, I think that if they're willing to map their taste and I can calibrate myself in accordance with that taste, then it doesn't matter if they negatively review a book. I'll probably still pick it up if I think that I would enjoy it. But I'm much more likely to drive to Barnes & Noble that day and go and get a book that they recommend versus any of these accounts that give the same kind of warm blurb to everything that doesn't actually give me a picture of what that book actually is. So this is one that enough people that I really trust have recommended it that I was like, I don't know if this plot is necessarily my thing, or like this voice, this sort of muted, distant love story. We've seen it enough times that I know approximately what I'm getting into before I sit down to read it, but I knew that I would probably enjoy it anyway. People said that it was likely to make you cry, and there were a couple months of the last year where I was working on my book revision in which, when I'm in a domain in which I feel like I'm stretching myself so entirely, I don't necessarily want exposure to other emotion. It's not the best time for me to be crying over a book. That's going to stretch me too much. So I waited until I was on the other side, and then until I was in the mood, which happened to be at the pool this last weekend. I wanted something that I could knock out in a couple hours that would be largely contemporary and enjoyable, and I was pretty sure that this would land on my tops. It ended up being one that I really enjoyed. I have a lot to book club from it, so hence the voice note. And I've had so many technical troubles trying to do this that whatever this one ends up being is just going to be how it goes. I kind of could immediately tell what type of lane this lands in. So, for example, people who prefer their storytelling to be kind of from a distance. It's this muted sensation. Basically, girl goes to college and meets boy in college, and then they feel feelings. And that's been something that's been done before. Like, no one's claiming this is an original plot, but like, I haven't even read Normal People yet. So I was curious how I would do with this. And also, there will be spoilers in this conversation. It's more book club style, so just so y'all know. But what I thought was great about Heart to Lover is that it's not so much about the love story, because as I said, we've seen this before. Like, the normal nuances of people falling in and out of love is a universal story for a reason. What I appreciated about this one was how it dealt with the layers of friendship around the concept of falling in love. So what I mean by that is that I think that I love friends to lovers stories, and what I think is so tricky to nail about them is the stakes and the risks of going from lovers back to friends. So to see this handled in such a refreshing and mature and still complicated way, I think was so, so good. The plot itself is that Casey, our main character, goes to college and is in love with this boy, Sam. And they're trying to figure out their relationship because he is, for example, extremely religious. And so that ends up being a layer to their relationship that causes their own conflict and ultimately is a point of tension that they're not able to get over. But Sam and her break up, and at this point, she's embedded into their lifestyle. So she's spent a lot of time at his house. He is largely a part of her college experience. So they are very much involved as a social circle. And then when she ends up falling for and getting close to his roommate Yash, Yash is concerned that Sam does not want them to be involved. And that, I think so many people can relate to that and have that experience of, your ex's friends, etc., and what to do when you have embedded yourself in a social circle that now is fundamentally different because the relationship has changed. Like, that is so frequent of an occurrence and such a devastating one that it's always kind of nice to see that, the complications of that within a book like this. And I think this one handles it so well and so clearly, while like indicating there's a moment when Casey and Yash are fully in the throes of their relationship, and Yash has just hung out with Sam, who's the original guy. And Casey has this moment of panic in which she's like, Yash is acting differently, and I don't know whether the last time with Sam was too much. And I thought it did such a good job of this like horrible crystallizing moment of realizing that maybe the dynamic has shifted because of some other random external thing. And then like the panic of not knowing if it's going to be the same as normal or whether something has changed and you need to brace yourself for the ending. This book made certain coming of age experiences come to the forefront. And I'm like, I do know that feeling, and it's a weird one and it's an uncomfortable one and all of that. So although like the love story itself is familiar in a way that we are used to, I thought that it did a great job with some of these like secondary situations or like the shades of gray, or like when you're already together and in the thick of it, these are some of the things that can happen. So I thought the awkwardness of tiptoeing around friend dynamics within a love story were so well done. And that is where Heart the Lover like really, really gets me. The first part of the book is basically her with Sam and Yash and the complication of all of that. And then later, after she graduates, she goes to Paris and she and Yash are figuring out what partnership post-grad basically looks like. Long distance, he's going to come to Paris, they're going to go to New York, figuring out kind of the compromises that go with that. And then the last half of the book deals with when she bolsters herself to leave Paris and decides to make moves with Yash. He does not show up to the airport. And again, this is a plot we've seen before. It's the devastation. It's the waiting for someone and they don't show up. This is also, I think, a twist that's been done before is Casey shows up to the airport and Yash doesn't, and she calls his parents and that's the ending of their relationship. But she was actually pregnant. And so she has to deal with knowing that this is like not something that they're going to come back from. So then the second half of the book deals with Casey now having moved on and found someone else, and she has children and a life. She's a best-selling writer. We love that. And what happens is that she and Yash are still friends, and there is this shadow of their previous relationship and all of that. But that's what I love about this book is the depiction of a friendship post-relationship. I think that not enough people consider in their love story. They don't talk about, because I know it's awkward for exes to be friends. I just think that the whole point of loving someone or falling in love with someone is that they are your friend. And a lot of the devastation from a relationship ending are based in that sense that you no longer get to have a friendship the same way. And that's still a factor for sure. Like now in Heart the Lover, Casey knows things about Yash that she can't unknow. And there's this stung quality in the aftermath of what do you love about someone independently versus within the context of a relationship. And then again with even Casey and Sam of being like, I don't want to be with this person. We were not a good fit, but I'm still offended if my best friend dates her. Like, stuff like that and the situations embedded in this I thought were so well done, because I think that's where all of like the messiness of love really comes about. Then the second half of the book is Yash and Casey are no longer together, but Yash then ends up getting cancer. And this is where I got a little bit nervous that it was going to veer into like the trauma porn of The Fault in Our Stars or Me Before You, where, okay, the big sad twist that everyone's talking about is that he's going to die and that it's going to be devastating. And what I thought was beautifully handled about Heart the Lover is that the plot is not hinging on Yash eventually passing away. Like that's devastating and all of that, but it's more so about how their relationship ended and how each of them talked about it. And then within that of like what responsibilities Casey has to Nash, like at his bedside as he's dying. So I have to give props to any narrative that talks really well about like what it's like to be at someone's bedside while they're dying. That sounds really dark, but it's a very valid part of life. And there's a reason why encounters with death and grief and all of that are actually considered an experience of awe, in that we feel the proximity to all these broader questions, like time seems to slow. It's a very weird scenario and you're like, okay, I guess I'll go get a platter of sandwiches. It's all just grieving and like anticipatory grief, and all of that can be so very strange. And then I thought about this too, because again, I obviously the friends to lovers, lovers to friends question is one that I have very strong thoughts about. Like I say it up front, like I love my ex, like not in that way, but you know, I would not have loved a person if I didn't care about them as a person. And I think he's wonderful and I hope for the world for him. And so it was so nice to see a situation like this depicted, in that if someone I once loved called me and had cancer, I would feel a responsibility if requested to go to their bedside and be a comfort regardless of any romantic intent. And I thought that Casey's depiction of doing that while also having a very successful partnership, like being in love with someone else, was very well done, because it's not like you're rooting for Yash and Casey to be together. You're rooting for a comfort and a peace and an understanding of how this love story did not work out, but it's still relevant and meaningful to the parties involved. Because I feel like what I said to my sisters when they asked me about what I thought about this book was that I think that a lot of time in a book like this, where it's touted as like big, gigantic, life affirming love stories, that you either have to root for them to be together, or it's turned into this big toxic thing where their experience is like getting over it and going to hell with that. Like, I think that it's so much harder and so much more rewarding to talk about the messy in between of people you love but are not meant to be with. It's called A Magnificent and Intimate New Novel of Desire, Friendship, and the Lasting Impact of First Love. And I think that's a great way to put it. Heart the Lover is a love story to a friendship, and that's what it needed to be, and that's what's so good about it. And then also, like, the quality of the writing, the quality of the work, I think almost reminds me of a short story in that the scale of things is very small. So what I said about it previously is that I probably prefer a little bit more variety in my love stories. Like, I like a little bit more scene variety. Like, this is a lot of conversations and them reading the same books. The sentences are very short and simple. It's just more minimalist. Like, again, there's like this kind of detached quality. Let me try to find a line that explains what I mean. I feel self-conscious about the mascara. I only put it on because I was bored, and they think I've held them up deliberately. It's a bad visit from start to finish. Like, that's kind of how the whole book is. And that is purely a taste thing. It's good for, I think, the shades of gray of the emotion that is displayed in this, where again, it's like very human, almost mundane emotion, but little slices of feeling that I would say don't normally get the spotlight. And what Yash says, I think, is completely the point of the book. They're talking about how he knew eventually that he was dying. And when they finally call Casey and are like, it's time, he's in the hospital. And then what we know at that point in the story is that Casey's family is dealing with their own health issues. So her son is going through a medical moment and her husband is dealing with it. And so there's starts to be these two forms of pressure coinciding at the end of the novel. And Yash says, like, at the time, you don't know what's major or minor. And if you've ever seen any of my voice notes before, I have a major fascination with hindsight bias and how we scaffold narrative and decide, again, like, what's major or minor, because it's all in comparison to what you decide your endpoint is. And relationally, obviously, the part of a love story where the couple is not together and it's dark night of the soul and you don't know what's going to happen. In a rom-com that you're watching, you know approximately what minutes that's going to go from. But in reality, you don't know if the person's going to come back. You don't know if it's going to work out. And if it works out, then the way you look back on those early days is like, you're going to say a very different story than in this one where Casey moves on, and it takes her a lot of grieving and confusion to do so. But then at his bedside, his family is like, oh, you're the one that got away. And she's like, well, that's unfair because Yash actually left me. So I think that it's so well done, because the conflict at the end is like, she's deciding whether or not to tell him about the pregnancy. And then he's like, well, you should have known that that was just a phase I was going to have. I always push people away. You didn't respond to my calls. And she's like, yeah, but you left me at the airport when we were supposed to move together. Of course that was going to devastate me. You don't know what's major or minor at the time. You don't know what's a blip or a breakup. Like, at a certain point, it's just people making the decisions that it's an ending or not. And I thought that that's one of the major themes of Heart the Lover. It's handled with a lot of maturity and nuance and confusion. And what is so beautiful about Heart the Lover is really just that it does not erase the love that Yash and Casey have. It's not diminishing that they were madly in love. I think it also did a really good job illuminating the hurt of, like, when you first fall in love with someone and you're like, oh, this person has power over me now. I feel very vulnerable to them. I hate this wave of feeling. Like, I wish that I were not so susceptible to this other person. And I thought that that was so well done. But for that reason, I think that it's a really, really good love story because of this quote I love from one of my other favorite books, Tiger Lily by Jodi Lynn Anderson, which talks about how each kind of love you have is really the only one. So it's not that she stops loving Yash or falls out of love with him. She still loves him, but she moves on to a more stable kind of love, a different partnership kind of love. And it really comes out when Yash and Casey are talking about their relationship, and she admits that she knows if they worked out, then they would have been really unhappy because Yash likes being alone too much. So they were in love. It was real. It was good. It could have worked out, but it didn't. But also if it had, it wouldn't have been the same type of love that she has with Silas, her husband. And for a while, I'm really, really glad that the book did not go with the pressure of her missing something with her son or somehow making a decision that was a betrayal of Silas. I thought that it was really good in showing that there were reasons for Silas to be frustrated with how she was handling things at the end and her responsibilities to her family, but she did not shirk them either necessarily. It's a complicated situation. She wants to say goodbye to this man she loved for a really long time. They all still have a really good friendship. There's no concern of like cheating or her running off into the sunset with this dying man. It's just a depiction of all these ways in which the people you loved at one point can be really complicated. And it's about commitment and the choices you make and all of that. And then I think that it reminded me a lot in tone of actually this collection of short stories by Marina Keegan. So a couple years ago, I think 2012, because I was just doing a wrap up of book history throughout my book blog, but there was a Yale grad named Marina Keegan who passed away a few days after graduation in a car accident, and her collection of work from undergrad was published posthumously called The Opposite of Loneliness. And it went on to sell really well. She has a very specific voice and style. I remember enjoying it as a teenager. And there's a story in there about how this is probably the one that sticks with me the most from the collection. But in that story, she deals with modern day, you would call it a situationship, this boy who passes away. And she knows that she was the rebound. So she knows that they were together, but that he was still hung up on his ex. And so the family gives her a collection of his journals and belongings and everything. And she's just a little bit uncomfortable in navigating this grief scenario because she knows that she was not the main girl for him, that it was someone else. So she's like, do I give these journals to the ex? Do I not? And I also just read Grief is for People by Sloan Crosley, which also talks about the awkwardness of grieving a friend versus a partner or someone closer in your orbit. So in Marina Keegan's story, it's like a boy she's dating that she doesn't know that well. And then in Grief is for People, it's like a friend and a colleague who's just separated enough. And then this one is very much, okay, this is someone I loved, someone I deeply care about. I'm actively with someone else, but I still deeply care about this person. And we have some loose ends, but none that threaten the main relationships in my own life. And I thought that that is so realistic and beautiful and this weird in between, and very much the way that relationships actually work versus being very cut and dry. And I think that the pressure of the ending put a lot on it. I'm really, really glad selfishly that Lily King did not take the easy way out, because the subtlety of the questions that Heart the Lover is asking are still very pressing and relevant. They just didn't need to be cliche, I suppose. Like these are strong enough pressures within her own questioning of, did I do things right? Did we see things the same way? Not that they have to, because ultimately they don't. Reconciling with the ways in which Sam and Yash knew each other that she wouldn't be able to touch, and the very real hurt of being left in the airport. And then I love the parallel of Silas going and picking her up at the airport. And I thought it was just beautifully done. And it does feel shorter and more subdued, I think, in scale than what I was expecting. But I understand why it made people cry a lot. I definitely felt the sting behind my eyes where I was like, oh, this one's getting me, like this one hurts. And I think the success of it is that it does show the hurt of the way a friendship evolves when there are romantic feelings involved. And I just think it's a really important story for that reason. I would love more nuance in how we talk about friends and exes and lovers and all of that, because I think that what this book does so successfully is that it never loses sight of the fact that when you love someone, you don't stop loving them. And not that it has to be romantic, and it doesn't need to be your one all end all be all. It's just like you love someone as a person. And that's just frankly so the way I'm wired. If I love someone, it's because I love them as a person. And so it doesn't need to be like, oh, the presence of this feeling of love, it has to be exclusive to a romantic relationship. Like, no, it doesn't. Like, you can decide it's ended. You can decide it's a friendship. It can be someone you were fond of once and never see again, but that doesn't erase the magnitude of the love feeling, I suppose. So it's very tender, it's very sincere. I think the earnestness of both the issues and the, affection and all that baked in are very true to how we interact as human beings in reality. There are so many good little connections I can make. All in all, I was kind of expecting more of intensity, life shattering sad, like a cinematic moment, showdown type thing. I'm so glad actually that this is more so a love story to a friendship, or like the friendship's affected by a love story. And it is a love story, but I'm glad that it didn't so easily veer into one of the camps of love stories that I'm used to seeing. And I think for that reason, people find it really significant and engaging and love.